Okay, so here's my prompt. And first off, there's no single right way to do this, right? So if your prompt looks totally different from mine, that's perfectly fine. So just compare and then either proceed with your prompt as is or make any changes that you think make sense, or alternatively go with my prompt, whatever you prefer. So let's read through this. Implement the deep dive step to expand the best candidate into a full business model. Candidate selection, for now, simply pick the highest scoring candidate from the current run, like we talked about. We'll come back to improve this later. And then we have the business model class using the base table pattern as always. And then here are the attributes that we're asking for. So name, a catchy startup name. We're asking for a value proposition. So what makes this product compelling? An unfair advantage. That's a little bit of a secret sauce. So that will result in a nice section about our moat, why this idea is hard to copy. The revenue streams. So a list of ways the business makes money. Go to market, a list of 3 specific channels to acquire the first 100 users. So we're being very specific here. Known competitors, a list of existing alternatives and how this differs. And last but not least, the tech stack recommendation. So suggested tools and frameworks to build the MVP. And of course, our usual database fields. And then the actual deep dive step. We can do both the step and the database models in the same prompt. So we're calling out that this is not a batch step. It's a single LLM call. We're saying to load the winning candidate and its supporting articles for context and use Gemini 2.5 Pro because we do need the reasoning capabilities of that model here. And finally, the system prompt should frame this as a product strategist creating a practical blueprint that a solo developer could actually execute. The output should be specific and actionable, not generic startup advice. So that I think makes sense. We're going to use plan mode here. Also worth calling out that while I was fairly explicit about the fields that we need for the business model, based on what I know works in my pipeline, I wasn't overly prescriptive about the implementation details. So we don't need to call out that Claude needs to implement the repository changes or create an Alembic migration or anything like that. We have clear patterns now in the code base that Claude can follow, so it should be able to figure this out by itself. Okay, here's the implementation plan. So let's take a good look at this. Context. The pipeline currently ends at synthesis, which generates 3 startup candidates with scores. The deep dive step picks the highest scoring candidate and expands it into a full actionable business model via a single LLM call, bridges the gap between rough idea and practical blueprint. Makes sense. Here we have the model classes with the fields that we asked for. I like that it specifically asks for a description. As discussed, that's really important. Here it's saying that the lists, so revenue streams, go-to-market, and known competitors will be persisted as JSON columns. I think that's a good choice as well. It's a nice way to store data like this without having to go overboard and implement relational tables for everything. The repository looks good. So create and get by run ID. And then we're also adding the method to the candidate repository to look up the top candidate for the run. Again, this will be replaced with the selection strategy later. And then we have the deep dive step following the usual pattern. System prompt, frame as a product strategist, creating a practical blueprint for a solo developer. Output should be specific and actionable. Real competitor names. Concrete revenue models, specific tech frameworks, not generic startup advice. We're registering it in the CLI, creating an Alembic migration, tests, updating Claude.md. So this all looks solid, I think. So I think we can go ahead and accept this plan. Okay, Claude is done. Here's a nice summary. Quick look here. So it implemented the model, repositories, deep dive step. Looks good. Let's take a look at the actual files. So here's the Alembic database migration. Okay, so we are creating the business models table with all the fields that we need. We are using JSON for the list fields, revenue streams, go-to-market, and known competitors. So that looks good. And then we have the foreign key constraints and the downgrade function. So this is solid. Okay, the models file. Let's open this in full screen actually, so it's easier to see. Okay, so here is our business model base. We have nice descriptions for everything. Again, the descriptions are really important for the LLM as guidance for what to return in these fields. So that looks solid. I like that it added some examples here. So for example, for revenue streams, it says, as an example, freemium SaaS at $29 a month for Pro tier. So that gives the LLM some good guidance of the types of things that it should return here. Okay. And then business model, the table class specifies to persist these fields as JSON, for example. So that's good. CLI. Repositories looks good. The repository tests also seems good. So steps, this is really the meat of the deep dive step. Okay. So it looks like it wrote a pretty detailed system prompt, which is promising. Let's take a good look at this. So you are a product strategist who turns startup concepts into practical blueprints that a solo developer could actually execute. Your output must be specific and actionable, not generic startup advice. That's a very good framing right there. And then we have some rules. So we want a name, so a catchy, memorable startup name that hints at what the product does. That's good. Value proposition, write a crisp statement of what the product does and why someone would pay for it. Be concrete. Unfair advantage. Identify the real moat, network effects, and so on. I like this here. So if there is no obvious moat, say so honestly and suggest how one could be built. That's better than just saying, oh, we'll execute better than the competitors or anything mundane like that. We have revenue streams, list specific pricing strategies with real numbers. Again, we have good examples here. So freemium with a $19 per month Pro tier, not just subscription model. So that's good. Go to market, exactly 3 concrete channels to acquire the first 100 users. Name specific communities, platforms, or tactics, not generic advice like social media marketing. That's also good. Known competitors, name real existing products or companies. Makes sense. We have a similar clause here. So if you don't know specific competitors, describe the category of tool people currently use as a workaround. That makes sense. And then last but not least, the tech stack recommendation. So recommend specific frameworks, databases, hosting platforms, and APIs. Optimize for solo developer speed. Pick boring, well-documented technology over cutting-edge tools. I think that's really good guidance. So this seems solid. We can always do some prompt engineering later if needed, but I think this is good right off the bat. Okay, and then the rest of the implementation. So init, load inputs. That's where we look up the top candidate for the run. We have the process function. So this is where we create the prompt and then run the agent and return the output. So let's look at how we format the prompt. We have print stats as well. So that'll be helpful for debugging. So printing the startup name and value. So then in format prompt, expand the startup candidate into a full business model. And then we pass in all the fields from the candidate, so theme, archetype, one-liner, and so on. We have the score. That's probably not going to be that useful to the deep dive step, but it also doesn't hurt. So I think we can just leave this. And then if we have articles, which we always should, we will append, so supporting articles for context. We append the article source and title, and then the first 2,000 characters of the article body, which should be more than enough context for the deep dive. So this looks great, actually.